Our build sequence included doing the floor, then we did the ceiling, then we did the bed, then we did the roof vents, and then we did the walls. As you can see in this picture, we first put down a layer of 1-inch pink rigid foam, the closed cell type, so it can't absorb moisture. Then on top of the foam we put a layer of Reflectix, and the Reflectix has the foil up and down both to help keep the heat in the van, and also keeps the heat from the engine coming into the van. Then on top of that we placed 1/2-inch plywood. We did not attempt to fill the grooves in the floor, the metal grooves. We just put the foam on top, and the airspace also acts as a real slight insulator. So that's how we insulated the floor. Just the 1-inch foam, the Reflectix, the 1/2-inch plywood. The floor floats, well, it sort of floats. We used 1/4-inch bolts with countersunk heads going through the floor, through the floor of the van, through the plywood into the floor of the van. They're positioned about 2 feet apart along the outside perimeter of the flooring. That just keeps the flooring from curling up on the edges. And then once we got all the furniture, all the cabinets installed, then we went ahead and retightened the nuts underneath because the weight of the furniture lowered it just a little bit, compressed the foam insulation a little bit. So we retightened all the nuts and everything's fine now. In total, we used 3 sheets of 1/2-inch plywood for the floor, 2 sheets in front of the wheel wells and 1 sheet behind. And then the cut-off ends were enough to fit in between the rear sheet and the middle sheet. So that gave us the entire floor down to 3 sheets. We knew where the junction was, where the short pieces would be underneath the garage, underneath the bed. So we weren't concerned about any issues with the floor moving right there. As you can see here, we used foil-coated soundproofing, which was stuck on the wheel wells. That keeps all the road noise from coming up through the wheel wells. Next, we installed all the ceiling wires for the lights, the 2 fans, any crossover wires that had to cross over the van from one side to the other. So those are all installed before we started working on the ceiling. There are 6 ceiling ribs. No ceiling rib at the back. There's 5 ceiling ribs in the middle of the van. There's 1 ceiling rib which is inside the storage compartment above the seats. And unfortunately, an 8-foot piece of material will not reach that one inside the storage area above the seats. So we had to use a piece of wood to extend that area. As you can see in this picture, the screws go into the ceiling rib, and then the board extends like 4 inches towards the rear of the van. This is enough that the ceiling material can lay on top of the board and supports the end of the ceiling material at the front of the van. We pre-drilled the light holes and the screw holes in the ceiling sheet before we attempted to install it. This made the installation much easier. The ceiling sheet was 3/16-inch birch plywood with plastic laminate on both sides of it. This gave us a nice smooth surface which would not need to be painted. We intended to use 4-inch rock wool bats of insulation in the walls and the ceiling. So we cut some of the insulation down to 1.25 inch thickness to go between the ribs and the ceiling. But the rock wool was really quite heavy, and it proved too heavy for the ceiling use. It made the ceiling sag between the longest ceiling ribs. So instead we had to take the ceiling back down, the front forward piece, and we had to replace the rock wool with rigid foam, which we placed between the ribs. And the rigid foam was only as wide as the sheet of ceiling board. We did in fact use the rock wool for all the walls, and from the edge of the ceiling board at the ceiling all the way down the walls we used the rock wool. We chose that because it provides excellent soundproofing, it fills all the void, and it will not absorb moisture. As you can see from this picture, we also taped Reflectix cut in 6-foot lengths going across the width of the van. We placed that up and taped it to the ceiling ribs. This allowed the Reflectix to be between the ceiling board and the ceiling ribs, which helps reflect heat back into the van when you're trying to heat the van. We left this 1 foot overlap on each side so we could have it continue on with more reflectics once we started doing the corners and the walls. Because there's no ceiling rib at the rear of the van near the rear back doors, we decided to use this piece of wood as a ceiling rib, but the wood would be visible underneath the ceiling. So the ceiling simply lays on top of the wood. So we used 4 1/4-inch rivet nuts, pop riveted into the metal, and then we simply pushed this piece of wood up in place once the ceiling installation was nearly finished, and put these 4 screws in, and that holds the back of the ceiling boards. It just lays on top, and the trim strip is not on in this picture yet. The back of the van ceiling is curved to match the roof, so there's quite a bit of pressure on this strip we mounted to hold the end of the ceiling up. So we just took a pry bar and a block of wood, and we pried the thing up into place when we put the screws in. So there's a lot of tension on it, and we had to use a pry bar to get it up in there. Because the thickness of this rear board holding up the ceiling is only 3/4 of an inch thick, we had to have an accurate board length to terminate so it lays on top of this termination board. We also had the ceiling fan right here, and we had 2 bed lights which were wide apart, so we decided to break the ceiling into a large front board and a much shorter rear board to facilitate installation. Remember, we had to pull wires through holes in these ceiling boards also. The hole in the center is for the factory stock dome light, and it's actually centered. This camera angle makes it look like it's off center, but it's centered on the doors. And the plug is right there. We're going to plug in the original factory dome light. So anytime we open the sliding door, we'll get light in the van while we're getting in or leaving the van. The installation of these ceiling boards was a little bit tricky. We had to tuck the front end of the long board up above that board we talked about earlier, which holds the front end of the board. So that held the ceiling panel in place, and we put wooden props under the back half of the board to hold it up so it was hanging down about 1 foot from the ceiling. This allowed us to reach around the side of the board above the reflectics, reach in there, get a hold of the wires, poke a hole through the reflectics, and push the wire out through the hole for the lights and the ceiling fan. Same way at the rear. Once we got the rear board installed, we screwed the front part of it, we tucked the back part in over that rear board. We got the front part dropped down. We grabbed hold of the wires, reached above the reflectics, grabbed hold of the wires, and pushed them down through the holes for the ceiling fan in the rear, and also the 2 bed lights. So that's why we designed this thing the way we did. It made it easy to install the ceiling panels once the wiring and reflectics and the insulation were all in place. We didn't get any pictures of the ceiling fan installation. But basically, once the ceiling panels were in, we went ahead up on the roof and measured and cut 2 14-inch square holes in the roof where we wanted the fans. Then we transposed that down, removed the insulation that was in the way, transposed that down to the ceiling, drilled the 4 corner holes from the roof of the van so we'd have good alignment. Then we went down inside and cut the 14-inch square holes in the ceiling panels of the van. It all went quite well. Just real fine adjustments to make the whole thing fit together with the trim plastic that comes with the fans. For the bed platform, we wanted a lightweight structure that was still strong. So we used 1 by 4-inch pine boards standing on their edge. And we took a router and rounded the bottom edges of the boards, so if you're in the garage, you'll be banging your head on the boards and cutting yourself. So we attached these 5 cross boards together with end boards. We nailed them together, the exact length that fit between the 2 van metal walls. Next, we drilled 4 equally spaced 1/4-inch holes through the end wood and the van wall for attachment. We wanted this to be removable later, so we used rivet nuts to attach the bed to the walls. Once the frame was attached to the walls, we went ahead and put 1/2-inch sheet plywood on top of the frame, and that became the bed platform. We glued and screwed that together also so there wouldn't be any squeaking going on. If you notice at the end of the bed, we left the top of the plywood so it had a 1/2 inch of mating surface on the side rail of the van. This way when we mount our wall panel, it can butt up against the side rail and we can screw to the side rail and have a good attachment of the wall panel to the van structural ribs. So this completes the construction of the floor, the ceiling, and the bed platform. Next subject will be the walls and cabinets.